So we're going to talk about business clients here and the terminology for those, and then how do we customize and what does that really look like. Thick clients is the first term that we come across here, and it doesn't necessarily refer to the size of the computer. What it refers to is a computer that meets requirements for running operating systems and all the applications that are needed to be run by the end user. And it may have local storage. More likely, it will be network connected and allow users to store on network devices. The high-end hardware really depends on what the computer is running. Office applications and Microsoft Windows or whatever it's running. That's a standard Office client computer. On the other side, we have thin clients. And thin clients give us the ability to remotely run applications on servers rather than on the workstation. So the computing power is on the server, not on the workstation. And so it just has to have enough of an operating system on it to do what's necessary to connect to the server. And all the work is done on the server. So it can have a very minimum CPU, very minimum amount of RAM, and it may have no storage at all. The network connection is the most important piece of that. And then if it's browser-based, if we're looking at something that's just going to be an internet browsing type machine, then we may have to have some specifications for that browser application. The pictures I put in here, a WISE terminal, you may have heard that term. It's been around for a long time. Very common thin client. And then on the right side, what's called the Jack PC, made by Chip PC. And that's the size of an electrical outlet, and the junction box is basically behind on the back side there, and it has a very small amount of computing power, just enough to get onto the network and allow that user to connect to a server to run the operations it needs to run. So lots of different things out there marketed as thin clients. What we need to understand is that a thin client means, again, not necessarily the size, but usually very small computing device. But the thin is the amount of requirements we need, minimum requirement, just enough to be able to get connected and do the work on another machine. The third thing we talk about here is the virtualization workstation. So if a user would have a need to run a Windows operating system and maybe a Linux operating system, we could do a dual boot. And that means you have two operating systems, you boot to one or you boot to the other. Or we can use virtualization, which allows us to run both Windows machines, Linux machines, in this case Solaris software, on different virtual machines and switch back and forth whenever we need to. The requirements here, as much RAM as you can possibly get into the machine, maximum number of CPU cores, because you want all those different programs to have plenty of access to the CPU. Has to have an operating system that will host virtualization. So that could be VMware or it could be Hyper-V, and there's some others out on the marketplace. It could be set up to run a remote application as well, hosting that VM on another server if you want. We talked about thick clients, we talked about thin clients, and different requirements for the two. And then we go to this newer format of a virtualization client, which allows us to run multiple operating systems at the same time. When we start talking about client workstations, now we start talking about the requirements based on the job that they're doing. We're looking here at media, graphic design, so computer-aided design for machines, for buildings, for architects, things like that. We may be talking about media. In just a minute, we'll have another one for a special media studio type device. And so we're looking at graphics processors that are going to be very high end. We're going to have separate graphics memory and cooling power, usually the high-end graphics cards, so that they can process and render all of this design. We probably want a multi-core processor, the maximum RAM that this motherboard can support. So again, we go back to that hardware stuff we learned. The motherboard determines how much memory you can have because it determines how many slots and how much memory it can address. The CAM workstations for the manufacturing environment, computer-assisted or computer-aided manufacturing workstations have specialized controller cards. It's noted in the book that may need particular workstations. And then we talk about audio and video editing and the requirements there. And the book has a nice list of some of the software applications that are used. But again, the people who are doing this kind of work may be the ones telling you what the specifications are they need for the workstations. And this will be, a one-of-a-kind workstation for that particular employee, unless you have lots of employees doing that type of work. So, you need to have that ability to find that equipment for them and support that equipment as they're working with it. Well, we have to go back to gaming eventually here. And many of you may have started out your computer interest with gaming rigs. And so depending on the gamer and whether it's a live online game with other people, another type of game, generally the speed of the action in that game is determined by the hardware that you're on. And so perfecting that hardware, getting it keyed into just the specifics needed may require some special tuning. It certainly requires a high-end hardware to provide the best experience available. And if it's an online game, of course, then high-speed internet as well. Book lists some games that are probably outdated by the time you get it. They do mention, as we talked about in the hardware section, the liquid-cooled or water-cooled processors, various display output tweaks. And then this has evolved and changed over time, but the home theater environment may also be PC driven, listed as a HT-PC, home theater PC. More and more video devices are being built with computing power in them, but otherwise your home theater store will be encouraging you to buy a sound device and surround sound devices and special lighting, and you could design a theater room state-of-the-art if you have the money to do that. Are we going to be supporting that? Who knows? Lots of companies will invest in this type, especially companies that may need to have a video room to preview commercials for their products. If they're doing commercials on television and they want to see that, they may have a multi-seat room with a home theater environment in it, and you'll be supporting it. So you'll have to learn how to handle all of that equipment. And it's all very unique per manufacturer. So that's really the custom environment introduction. I won't call it a complete chapter, but it's important for your test to understand those differences between thick client, thin client, virtualization client, and then what's driving the customization is usually the end result. So it's the game, it's the CAD software, it's the manufacturing software, it's the sound mixing software. Those are the things that are going to be driving your purchase of equipment based on their requirements. So be sensitive to that, ask questions, make sure if the person is doing it that they do have some experience in setting up a system if they're picking out the components, and if not, enroll some people that are professionals in picking out the equipment for that. So if you do home server PCs, and many people do for storage of videos and pictures and so on, and access to the entire network in the home to provide that, again, storage in this case is probably more important than processing power. And many times in the home environment, we need Wi-Fi access to get to those components. So that wraps up this lesson. It was one of our shorter ones. Have you had any experience in any of these kind of setups that we talked about? Did you do a home theater setup, a gaming PC? What types of custom setups do you think you'll encounter in your role as an A+ tech? Well, that really depends on your client. If it's a law firm, you may not have high-end custom screens and graphics processor, but you may have a home theater. The law firm may need something to view testimonies or things like that. or they may just have the money and want one. If it's if it's an investment firm, I've worked with some investment firms where the brokers needed to have multiple screens to watch all the markets, sometimes 6 or 8 machines of display machines to see various markets on each machine. And so there are equipment manufacturers out there that can provide you with multiple output video cards and things like that. So lots of things to look at on lesson 13.